started to come around 1904, I think that's when it was. And what had happened was, prior to the U.S. allowing Filipinos to be in the U.S. Navy, they were recruiting people from Japan and China to stoke the coal, to make the ships go. So you had the Filipinos, they were in the ports all over the United States. Many of the port cities still have vestiges of old communities. They're there, we just have to look for them. And their families are mixed race. And many of those families, I dare say, go back maybe 4 or 5 generations. It's something that we should really look at. So now we're coming into, can I make this sort of a capsulized history? We're coming into the 60s, you know, when the law changes. So all of a sudden, you see all these Filipinos coming in, and they're educated. They're not 14-year-old kids anymore. They're not looking for an education. They have an education. We have people who are coming, that first group that came in, it was part of the big brain drain of the Philippines. They got their bachelor's, their master's, many of them had PhDs, many of them were doctors. It was creating something. So this is where I came in with my research. I was dealing with people now who were Filipino like my parents and me, but they were different in a way from my parents and their peers. But they still had the same problems. Because people, there's still vestiges of how people perceived us. And so you look at what was happening during the 60s and the 70s, America was going boom. We had the Vietnam War, we had civil rights, and then in the Filipino community, we had Marcos. And if you're in the Filipino community or involved in anything, this really changed it. All through our Filipino communities around the country, things were happening. Are you a friend? Are you not a friend? Are you this way? Are you that way? I frankly was very liberal. So I fought for civil rights. I fought for civil rights for one reason. My parents were still alive. My husband and I were trying to get our foothold, and we had children. I have 8 kids. And it was important, I was running a youth program. It was important for me that my children and their peers would never go through what I had to go through, my parents had to go through. It was important for us to finally be equal, or for them to be equal. It meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to a lot of us. And so we joined. At the same time, many of us became marches against war, you know. I mean, doing a youth program, some of the kids that I worked with when they were little were coming back in body bags. So I was conflicted. I was patriotic, and yet these kids were coming back in body bags. I said, why? So many young Filipino kids were not in college, were going off to war. And just recently, within the past 3 years, I've started to do a research project on Filipinos in Vietnam. And I've gotten on tape stories they refused to tell until just recently, been 40, almost 50 years. So anyway, we're coming up to where we are pretty much right now, and I don't know how much time do I have. I don't want to cut in on you, that's why.
No, you're prettier than I am.
So now, now we have Filipinos all over. Many Filipinos have made it, and yet a lot of Filipinos have not, in a way. We have communities all over this country. We have communities like New Orleans, where when I first met them at our second conference, this young lady at the dinner, they had a mini Mardi Gras for us because they're they're people from New Orleans. And she said, I'm very proud to say that I'm a 5th generation Filipino American. We're all looking at her with hazel eyes and brown hair. We thought, wow. People who are recent immigrants from Illinois started to calculate how many years that was. So we go back many, many, many years. Filipinos are lost in American history books. I think if you would go back and look at your history books, if we're mentioned if a paragraph is given at all to Filipinos and even what they did, I would praise the author. You know? We were the only Asian country that was part of the United States. I remember going to a national history conference once. It was in Canada. And there were people, there were maybe around 75 people in the room, all historians teaching history. So I said, how many of you knew that the Philippines at one time was part of the United States? Around 3 people raised their hand, and they taught history. They were teaching American history. You know? So if I asked them a few more questions, they probably would have been even lost more. So what do they know? What do they know about our people? What do our people know about themselves? What do our young Filipinos know? They only know about themselves. They don't know what we've gone through to get to where we are. I think a lot of young Filipinos now know more about what's happening in the Philippines because they have these Filipino networks. So I just really wonder the importance. Why is Filipino American history so important? Well, for me, the reason I started, because when I was doing my research on Asian Americans, at the same time, Asian American studies were starting up. And so I was being called in to give small lectures in classes run by Japanese or Chinese professors. And all they said is all the wrong things. Filipino women were not allowed to come to the United States. I said, wait a minute, my mother came. I mean, I was born here, what'd you do? Oh yeah, a stork dropped me off here. That was it. There was no way that these people could say, I said, well, they said Carlos Malusan does not write about women. Well, he wrote about other things. He wasn't doing the history. He was writing his own experiences. So at this time, and then the opening with the archives, when they asked me to do the oral history project, I thought, my God, there's so much to learn. So even though I'm Filipino, I lived here my whole life, and I thought I knew my people, I have found out as I go around the country and we started Juan's, how little I know. Every time we have a conference, I learn. So I'm always bothered by someone who says, oh yeah, I know it all. Well, they know all that they know, but they don't know it all. We keep uncovering stories. We keep uncovering really interesting. Some stories I won't tell you, but they're interesting. Some of the best stories shouldn't be told in a big gathering. Maybe I'll meet you outside. But that's the people. I used to say about Filipinos, we were like, among the Asians, we were like the Technicolor Asians. They had big stories. We have many stories to tell. And so with fonts, what we try to do is we encourage people to do your own account. When you look at here, you don't have a body of people who went to Alaska and worked in the fields. No. What you have, though, you have people who worked in the Navy. Many Navy stories. And the Navy stories here goes back almost 100, more than 100 years. That's old history. So I would say, also living in this room, part of the stories, because they're not written, if whoever does the work plan to possibly teach something about Filipino American history, that whoever does the planning would consider using people in the community as a source, you know what I mean? To give to enhance it, to build up on it, because that's what you need. You need the story, you need the real story. A lot of times when people write things, they write from their own perspective. But I found out by doing that, and I praise the guy who insisted I do the oral history project so many years ago, almost 50 years ago. He really opened up my life and started funds eventually. And each one of you, I don't know where you come from, I do this with a lot of people. I would love to work with you. Where did you come from? Where did your family come? You know, where did you settle? Were you always here? In the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area? What country did your family come from? When did they come? How long have you been here? To me, every single one of you is interesting. I'm a curious person. I would love to know about you. I would like to know how many Filipinos you've known. If you taught them. If you were curious about them. So, anyway, I think you were going to do something.
Oh, I was.
Huh?
Yeah, I am, actually.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm still on Chicago time, even though I live in Seattle.
Give Auntie Dorothy a round of applause. Actually, before I go on to this, does anyone have any questions or comments?